If you came to me and said, Leah, I only have time to read 10 books this year, what should I read? Here are the 10 books that I would recommend to you. Hi guys, welcome back, or welcome if you are new, and welcome to a book recommendations video. As much as there are hundreds of books that I adore, and in return I feel like you would adore, we're going to talk about 10 books today that truly, if you only have time to read 10 books this year, if your average reading goal for the year is 10 books, I honestly think that you should be reading all of these. Before we do go into the book recommendations though, I would love to take a minute to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Wild. I have been a huge lover of Wild for years. I've spoken about them already on my channel. I am completely obsessed with them and their mission and all of their products. If you've never heard about Wild before, they are absolutely my favorite deodorant company. They are vegan, powered by plants, and cruelty-free. Sustainability is something that is very important to me, and I feel like it should be for everyone, and Wild's ethos very much matches that. They have saved over 600 tons of single-use plastic, which is insane, and all of their deodorants are paraben-free, free of aluminium salts and any harsh chemicals. Also, for anybody with sensitive skin, Wild is absolutely perfect for that. I definitely have some sensitive skin and I've never had any issues with any of their products. It's so calming and soothing, and I honestly think their latest collection is my favorite yet. This is the Midnight Bloom collection. Look at how beautiful this case is. Not only is the aluminium case so beautiful, but the scent that pairs with this of black rose and velvet, guys, this is definitely my favorite one they've done yet, I'm not gonna lie. Of course, all of their deodorants do come in gorgeous aluminium cases and they are all refillable, so I will just show you how quick and easy it is to change out, switch up your Wild deodorant. Take your case and very simply just pull off the bottom and you'll get this compartment here. Take your refillable deodorant and you literally just pop it right on top. It will click into place. Put the case back over it, click it into place, and then all you literally do is just spin it, and then you have your beautiful smelling refillable deodorant. And this one, guys, genuinely, if you can smell it, go smell it. Wild do also do other refillable body care products. For example, they do have a refillable body wash, which I also really love, again, the black rose and velvet scent. Their body washes are also completely compostable, which I think again is so important. If you are intrigued in trying Wild for yourself, I do have a discount code, which is pages20 for 20% off of your order. I also have the link at the very top of my description box. I highly recommend checking out all of their products, or you can scan the QR code on screen now. Like I said, I've been using Wild for years, and ever since starting using them, I've never switched back to any other deodorant. I am completely obsessed with them, so a massive thank you again to Wild for partnering with me on this video. Okay, and now let's get into the 10 books that I think you absolutely need to read this year. We're gonna go in no particular order, we're just gonna pick from the stack. So first and foremost, we have Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy. This book I feel like was absolutely everywhere last year for such incredible reason. Charlotte McConaghy as a writer is so unique and so spectacular. I think especially in her approach to writing literary fiction that also does borderline mystery, also her approach to writing things like climate change. Her characterizations are always jaw-dropping. They are real character studies and they are so flawed but feel so real and so raw. If you have no idea what this book is about, we are essentially following a family who live on this lighthouse on this island very close to Antarctica. They are quite literally, as you can imagine, in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of nowhere. No one ever really visits this island, and then one day a woman washes ashore. Naturally, the book begins with so many questions as to why she is there, what her motives are. However, it becomes this tale and this story of, without a doubt, the mystery as to why she's there, mysteries that happen all across the island, and simultaneously it's just such a rich family drama. As I already mentioned, there are such rich discussions on climate change because the island is slowly sinking due to rising sea levels, and it is just phenomenal. I feel like it is a book in a league of its own. It stands on its own. It is absolutely breathtaking. The ending, honestly, I did not see it coming. There is not a single person that I've spoken to about this book that saw the ending coming, but it made so much sense for the story, for the characters. I fell in love with our protagonist. All in all, Wild Dark Shore is such a spectacular piece of fiction slash literary mystery if you are into that, and I'm so excited to read more from her that I feel like this is a must for anybody to read this year. Next in the stack, we have The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. Babe, oh my god, this book is devastating, but also the most hopeful thing I've ever read in my entire life. If you have never read anything by Yoko Ogawa before, I feel like there's a couple of things you need to know. First and foremost, her writing and the way that she writes characters, kind of like Charlotte McConaghy, is so incredibly raw and so palpable and so human. She so perfectly depicts what it is like to be a person and to have relationships and connections to everyone around us. And another thing that you should know is that she is probably going to make you cry. As I said, this is one of the most hopeful, beautiful, and equally devastating books I've ever read, probably in my entire life. In this book, we are essentially following our protagonist who becomes a housekeeper for this elderly man, and in doing so, oftentimes when working, she would bring exploring her son, who is a young boy, and the elderly man that she cares for had an accident 17 years ago. Now he can only retain 80 minutes of memory, so his memory is very short term, and it is such a beautiful story. Very much on memory and wanting to reflect back on your life and only being able to remember snippets and simultaneously what that means to the relationships around you and the people that you forget. It is such an astounding story on unlikely friendships, the friendships that develop not only between the housekeeper and the elderly man, but simultaneously her son and the elderly man. What can happen when two different generations find a familiar hobby or familiar similarity, and is just so astonishing. Obviously, because of the themes that we are following, it is so heartfelt and naturally quite upsetting in places. The elderly generation that we're exploring here is so bittersweet, but ultimately it is absolutely this really hopeful story to its core about humans and about relationships and connecting to people who we don't always feel like we have connections to. I very much realized last year that a subgenre in literary fiction that I really adore is when we are following the relationship between different generations, or like the younger generation and the elderly. But like, it adds so much to a story, and this just did it in a beautiful way. And Yoko Ogawa's writing anyway is absolutely superb. Would highly recommend. A book that is naturally so very different to The Housekeeper and the Professor, but I do feel like in terms of the unlikely friendship element, is My Friends by Frederick Backman. So similar. I do feel like that, of course, this one is a lot more popular than The Housekeeper and the Professor. If you have already read this and you loved the dynamic between Louisa and Ted, please then read The Housekeeper and the Professor. However, My Friends by Frederick Backman was absolutely one of my favorite books of last year. I know I'm definitely not alone in that. It did its rounds. Frederick Backman is just such a phenomenal novelist. The way that he balances comedic timing with really, really devastating and imperative scenes is outstanding. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like every other scene I was crying, and then I was laughing, and then I was completely shocked at what was happening, and then I was crying all over again. I genuinely cried through about 80% of this book, but it was an experience that I'm never going to forget, and it was a perfect piece of literary fiction to me. This is just one of my favorites. I don't even have words for it. Again, to give you a little bit of a synopsis about this one, we are essentially following Louisa, who is a young girl, and she's had such a tough upbringing. She has always been living in the foster care system, but there has always been this one painting that's kept her going in life, and it is a story about one day what happens when she sees it in person for the first time, when she briefly meets its artist, and simultaneously when she learns about the people within the painting. Every single character in this book was so fleshed out, was so palpable. They felt like they leapt off of the page. They feel like real people in my brain, and I definitely want to say that I felt that with every single Frederick Backman book that I've read yet. He's absolutely solidifying himself as one of my favorite writers ever. This book specifically, however, is up there with one of my favorite pieces of literary fiction. I also feel like it's a really great one if you're not into literary fiction. If you've never read one before, this is such a great place to start. Simultaneously, off of the back end of it, you're going to fall in love with it, and you're going to want to binge read everything that he's ever published. So My Friends, if you haven't read it yet, oh my god, you are lucky. Grab tissues. Next we have a classic, and this is one of my now favorite books ever, and I've only read it this year so far. If you're not new here, you will know that this writer is my favorite writer of all time. That is Clarice Lispector, but I specifically want to recommend The Passion According to G.H. This is the most recent Lispector that I've read, and simultaneously one of the best, and it is tiny. Like, this is such a bingeable read. There are so many things that I can and I want to say about Clarice Lispector. I feel like I really do sing her praises on here. However, she's my favorite writer ever. I really resonate with her, and I do just truly believe that she is in a league of her own when it comes to writing. If you've never read a Clarice Lispector book before, I feel like you should know that her books are very stream of consciousness, absolutely so philosophical in their approach to discussing life, morality, mortality, girlhood. She really does not hold back in questioning life and questioning why we are the way that we are, and simultaneously what happens after death. If you love the thought of reading philosophical texts like that, but nothing that is too heavy or too dense or really difficult to grasp, then I feel like you would love Clarice. This one, however, the plot of this specifically is so fascinating. We are following a protagonist who one day sees a cockroach on the ground. In an absolute frenzy of seeing this cockroach on the ground, not really knowing what to do with it, she crushes it within a wardrobe door, and it lays on the ground dying. Thereafter, just due to the fact that she has crushed this cockroach and it is slowly losing life, she enters this philosophical spiral, and that I feel like it is such a rich fever dream. In this spiral, she is questioning everything. She is questioning humans versus animal life. Does an insect's life mean just as much as ours? If you do kill something like an insect, your morality and simultaneously, of course, the mortality that pairs with that. Unsurprisingly, I will recommend Clarice Lispector forever. I feel like whenever I do any sort of book recommendation video, I will always try and find a way to worm her in and to get more of you to read her books. She is just my favorite writer of all time. I know she's quite marmitey. I know some people love her, some people really don't. However, she's she's my babe. And The Passion According to GH is now absolutely up there for me as one of her best novels so far, so I would highly recommend. And it's really short. There's no excuse. Next up, we do have another classic. I very purposely paired these together, and this is the most recent classic that I actually read, and that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I did say in my most recent reading vlog of me reading this and my entire experience of it that I feel like I'm going to be recommending this book for a really, really long time. This is a classic that I had on my radar for years, and you guys finally pushed me to read it for that video, and I'm so happy that I finally did. I don't feel like this is a book that is absolutely imperative to read this year just because it's amazing, but simultaneously there is actually an adaptation with Netflix coming out, I want to say later this year, maybe in the summer. I do feel like a lot of people are now going to be reading it off of the back end of that, and if you want to read the book before watching the show, now's the perfect time. Naturally, with this being a modern classic and simultaneously it's quite a large one, it's not the shortest classic ever. I feel like a lot of people are intimidated by it. I was very intimidated by it. However, I must say that the language in here, the narrative, the text is so accessible. I don't know what Steinbeck did, but when reading this book, you really do reach a flow state. Everything makes such perfect sense. You're really understanding everything, the narration and simultaneously the setting. The atmosphere of this book is so palpable and so astonishing and so rich, and I actually feel like this is a great one to read spring to summer. I'm honestly very tempted to do a reread just before the show, but if you don't know anything about this one, I would just say that it's a generational story that kind of spans over decades. It is a real character study. At first we are following a father, and then we're following a pair of brothers, and then we're following their children and their wives and their entire lives. There is not a stone that goes unturned in this book. Again, it is another one that is so rich in discussing connections and how we connect to people who we don't have a lot to relate to. Very much like The Passion According to GH, solely on the basis that if you want a classic that discusses morality, this has to be up there. There is such a thou mayest attitude with this book, and it really goes into how to be the perfect person, if that does even exist, how to inherently stop being a bad person. If you truly believe you are a bad person, do all of our kind of motives and our actions reflect who we are as people throughout our entire lives? It is just astonishing, and in my opinion is really worthy of all of the hype and all of the love that it gets. It floored me. I fell in love with it. I did not want to put it down. A classic that I feel like everyone should probably read at least once in their lives, but I mean, with the adaptation coming out this year is perfect. Next, we have a book that I've honestly been recommending since the dawn of my channel, since the start of my channel, and it is still one of my favorite books ever. It is sort of a classic, more poetry, non-fiction though, and that is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. There is nothing like the first time I ever read this book, and I remember it so vividly. It shifted so much in my life, and even since then I absolutely stand by the fact that I said that this book changed my life. And I think if you are a creative, I think if you're a writer, it might just do the same. This book is absolutely tiny, and as you can see, I underlined so many of my favorite quotes. I really desperately need to do a reread, but this is such an astonishing piece of poetry, piece of non-fiction. This entire book is essentially full of letters that Rilke once sent to an army cadet, and those letters spanned so many different themes, truly ranging from all facets of life, of love, of sex, of grief, of being a creative, of being a writer, of how you create in a world in spite of hating it. It is absolutely jaw-dropping. It is absolutely astonishing. I feel like I've lived a lot of my life since reading this. By certain quotes that I've read, I feel like the advice that I took from this, not only as a creative and as a writer, but simultaneously just as a human being, was astounding. This is absolutely a book that I will stand on a stage and scream that everyone should read this at least once in their life. And again, it is so incredibly short. The text is quite big, and the writing in here is just so phenomenal. I'm so convinced that everyone can relate to at least one thing in this, and it's just beautiful. I highly recommend it forever and ever and ever. And it's been like 6 years. Next up is one quite far removed from all of the subject matter that we've already discussed. This one is probably one of my favorite pieces of weird girl fiction ever, and that is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. Melissa Broder is such an incredible writer, like I said, especially when it comes down to the strange literary fiction, weird girl fiction, very magical realism as quite grotesque in places. And this book specifically for me, I absolutely fell in love with. It is so unique. It is so weird. It has one of the most raw and relatable approaches and representations of grief that I've personally ever read. I really do feel like this is one going into knowing as little as possible. However, I do feel like you should know that the protagonist is essentially venturing on this journey throughout the Californian desert. She is trying so desperately to to escape the heaviness of her husband having an illness that is worsening and her dad being in the ICU. This book very much discusses a lot of premeditated grief, of how you know you're going to come to this point where you are going to lose these people in your life and there is going to be this immense grief that is going to follow it, and how do you deal with that. It is so raw and really strips to its bones what it is to be human, what it is to grieve, what it is to go through loss, and what it means to be desperate. As she's walking around this Death Valley, naturally she becomes so desperate for so many different things in life, and it is a real trip of a novel. It's very fever dream, at times really feels very magical realism-esque, and it was just so astonishing and is so unique. You could argue that this feels more vibes than plot. However, when it does come down to the plot and the characterization, like I said, it's so raw and it is so honest, and I feel like it is something that a lot of people can resonate with. It is one of those books that you're either not going to want to put down, or when you finish it you're going to be like, what the did I just read, but in the absolute best way possible. I need to do a reread of it. I absolutely love it. Another one that I suppose falls into the sort of weird girl, magical realism, really unique literary fiction is Shark Heart by Emily Hebert. This was one of my book club books of last year, and I genuinely think about this book all of the time. Absolutely following similar themes to Death Valley. I feel like if you've read this and you liked it, you should read that, and vice versa. We are following. To be honest, we're actually following quite a bit in this, but first and foremost, we're following our protagonist, who has only very recently gotten married, and her husband one day gets diagnosed with this condition where he is essentially slowly turning into a great white shark. As insane as that sounds, in this book this is very normal. Mutations like this are not common, but they do happen, and it can kind of be mutated into really any sort of animal. However, great white sharks are seen as the worst mutation, so again it's following themes of premeditated premature grief. Actually, I've been saying premeditated grief, it's not that, it's premature grief. This book is so poignant and so bittersweet. Our protagonist, I resonated with her so deeply. She was a character that just really made sense to me. Every corner of exploration that we have for all of these characters was done with so much care and so much intention. As you can imagine, it is devastating in places, but it is also so full of hope. There is a scene in this specifically after he's turned into the great white shark that is absolutely jaw-dropping, and I truly believe that the way that Emily Hebert narrated this story was so beautiful and so eloquent, and honestly just so masterful. It is so unique. It's one of those books that when I finish reading it, I'm like, this is such a genius idea, and she executed it perfectly. I absolutely loved it. Such a unique one. I am so intrigued to read anything that she does next, and I really feel like she's just going to be an author to watch in the literary fiction space, so I adored it. Again, like all of these, I would recommend. We only have 2 books left. This next one is one that I read years ago, however I feel like it is so imperative to read right now, and that is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pin. Despite this being longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2023, I feel like I never really see anyone talking about this book or anyone reading this book anymore, and it's such a shame because it's so beautiful. Wandering Souls is a book where we are essentially following 3 siblings as they flee Vietnam and they immigrate to Hong Kong. This is a book steeped in immigration, steeped in war. It is a historical fiction, I suppose, that is so eloquent, and it is so heartbreaking but very imperative. Absolutely, when I read this, I want to say 3 years ago, but maybe even longer, it's always been so imperative to read stories, reading diversely always, of course, and reading from so many different kinds of voices, and I feel like stories on immigration are just as important to read right now. Obviously, naturally, there are trigger warnings that comes with this sort of read. However, more so than anything, it is so imperative, and I also want to say that Cecile Pin's writing, the narrative in this is so unique. The way that she blended all of these siblings together, and I really don't want to elaborate more than that because it would go into spoiler territory, but it was just done masterfully and so beautifully, and it was just astonishing. I loved it so much that I've been awaiting a new Cecile Pin book for years, and she actually does have a 2026 release that I'm very excited to read, but this was astonishing. Her writing is so eloquent, such an imperative read. Again, would highly recommend. Okay, and last but certainly not least, I've actually just realized that we had 2 books from the same author on here. That was absolutely unintentional, but that was Gokū Agawa with The Memory Police. This is another book that I feel like I've recommended so many times because it is one of my favorites, and I really desperately need to do a reread. However, if you've never heard about The Memory Police before, we are essentially set on this island where things start to go missing. Objects can go missing, words can go missing, and they completely sort of evaporate from existence. And for the majority of the population, most people cannot remember these things once they are gone. However, there are some people that can, and if you can and you've been exposed for that, the memory police will be after you. No one knows where the memory police take these people, what they do with them, but they are never seen again. And it is this really, really palpable story, I suppose, of memory, of course, but simultaneously the sort of meanings that we place on materialistic things versus the things that are not material, the impact that when both of those sort of vanish, what that has on us as a community and also as individuals, as humans, as creatives. I think if you are a writer, but simultaneously it is one of those books that if you are a huge lover of reading and of literature, which I'm assuming if you're reading it you are, it's going to have so much more meaning for you. Writing this, I've already spoken about how absolutely in a league of her own Yoko Ogawa is with her prose, but in this one it was devastating. It was so real and it felt so vivid. Obviously, naturally, this has such high post-apocalyptic themes. However, unfortunately, it really didn't feel too far from our own world, and just the way that she did it was so palpable and just so unique and so incredible. And it's a book that, again, I read years ago and I still think about it all of the time. In my opinion, it is a masterpiece and another one that I feel like everyone should read at least once in their lives. So those were the 10 books that I think you absolutely have to read this year. Whether you read more than 10 books in a year, please try and sandwich any of these in if you haven't read them already. As always though, if you have read any of these, please let me know what you thought about them, whether you like them, whether you dislike them. Simultaneously, what is a book that you would recommend to me, to anybody else, that we have to read this year? Of course, there are so many books that I am so excited about, that I know you guys are so excited about, but I am always open to your recommendations. I take all of your recommendations as Bible, truly I do. Or if you watched to the very end of this video and you don't know what to comment any star emoji. Don't forget to check out Wild at the very top of my description, or you can scan the QR code on screen to use my code PAGES20 for 20% off your own order. Another massive thank you to Wild for partnering with me on this video. And yeah guys, that is it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in another one very, very soon.